Have you ever wondered why toxic people seem to find you like a magnet? Why manipulators, narcissists, and energy vampires gravitate toward you while healthy, balanced individuals seem to pass you by? You might think it's bad luck, coincidence, or that you're just too kind for your own good. But Carl Jung discovered something far more unsettling. There's something you're unconsciously broadcasting. A signal you're sending out into the world without even realizing it, and toxic people can sense it from miles away. They don't choose their victims randomly, they hunt with precision. And if you keep attracting the same type of destructive relationships over and over again, you need to understand what Jung called the shadow projection, and how your unhealed wounds are acting like a beacon for predators. Jung said that everything we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves doesn't disappear. It gets projected onto others. And here's the terrifying part. Toxic people are experts at reading these unconscious signals. They can sense your unmet needs, your abandoned inner child, your desperate hunger for validation that you've been carrying since childhood. While you think you're just being nice, helpful, or understanding, you're actually advertising your vulnerabilities to anyone skilled enough to exploit them. Think about this for a moment. When was the last time you attracted someone who was genuinely secure, emotionally stable, and capable of giving as much as they received? If you're honest with yourself, you'll probably realize that the people who pursue you most aggressively are often those who need something from you. Those who see you as a source of supply rather than an equal partner. This isn't coincidence, it's psychology in action. And it's happening because you're unconsciously playing a role that toxic people desperately need you to play. The wounded healer, the eternal rescuer, the person who always has room for one more broken soul in their life. But here's what Jung understood, that most people miss. You're not attracting broken people because you're compassionate, you're attracting them because you're broken too, and your brokenness matches theirs in a way that creates a perfect storm of codependency and manipulation. Carl Jung spent decades studying the human psyche. And one of his most profound discoveries was that we don't see people as they are, we see them as we are. Our unconscious mind projects our own unresolved conflicts, fears, and desires onto others, and toxic people have learned to weaponize this natural psychological process. They become chameleons, mirrors that reflect back exactly what your wounded psyche most desperately wants to see. You think you're choosing them, but the truth is far more complex. Your unconscious patterns are choosing them. Your unhealed trauma is calling to their predatory instincts, and your desperate need to feel needed is broadcasting itself to anyone within emotional range. Jung called this the personal unconscious, that dark repository of everything we've suppressed, denied, or simply never learned to integrate. And toxic people are like psychological archaeologists. They can dig up your buried pain faster than you can hide it. But why does this happen? Why do some people seem immune to toxic individuals while others collect them like broken toys? The answer lies in what Jung discovered about the shadow self and how childhood conditioning creates invisible wounds that never fully heal. From the moment we're born, we begin learning what we need to do to survive, to be loved, to be accepted, and for many of us, those early lessons taught us that our worth depends on what we can provide for others. Maybe you learned that crying brought punishment, so you became the strong one, the one everyone could depend on. Maybe you discovered that being perfect earned you brief moments of approval, so you became the overachiever who never stops trying to prove their value. Or perhaps you realized that taking care of others was the only way to feel important, so you became the eternal caretaker, the one who always puts everyone else's needs first. These adaptations helped you survive childhood, but they also created invisible wounds. Gaps in your psyche where healthy boundaries should exist, And toxic people can spot these gaps the way predators spot limping prey. They don't see your kindness as a virtue, they see it as weakness. They don't admire your willingness to help, they recognize it as an addiction to being needed. They don't appreciate your understanding nature, they identify it as a desperate hunger for approval that they can exploit indefinitely. Jung understood that these patterns operate below the level of conscious awareness. You genuinely believe you're just being a good person. But your unconscious mind is running programs that were installed decades ago. Programs that tell you that your value depends on your utility to others, that love must be earned through sacrifice, that saying no means being selfish, and that other people's needs are always more important than your own. Toxic people didn't learn to manipulate through books or courses. They learned through necessity, through survival, through growing up in environments where manipulation was the only way to get their needs met. They developed an intuitive understanding of human psychology that would impress professional therapists. And they can read your unconscious patterns like a roadmap to your vulnerabilities. When you meet someone new and immediately feel that spark of recognition, that sense that this person really sees you, really understands you in a way no one else has, Jung would tell you to be very careful. What you're experiencing might not be genuine connection, it might be psychological mirroring. The toxic person's unconscious ability to become exactly what your wounded inner child has always been looking for. They don't love you, they love what you represent, the unfulfilled promise of finally getting their needs met through another person. And you don't love them, you love the fantasy they've created. The illusion that someone finally values you for who you are, rather than what you can provide. But this mutual delusion always crumbles, because relationships built on unconscious projections and unmet childhood needs are destined to become battlegrounds of disappointment and resentment. The tragedy is that while you're busy trying to heal them, save them, or prove your worth to them, you're abandoning yourself. Every time you accept less than you deserve, every time you make excuses for their behavior, every time you convince yourself that their potential is worth more than your peace, you're reinforcing the very patterns that attracted them in the first place. Jung said that what we resist persists, and the more you try to change toxic people, the more deeply embedded you become in toxic dynamics. The more you give of yourself to prove your worth, the more worthless you feel. The more you sacrifice your needs to meet theirs, the more needy and desperate you become. It's a downward spiral that only stops when you recognize the unconscious patterns that created it. But here's where it gets even more complex. According to Jung, we don't just attract people who mirror our wounds. We also attract people who carry the qualities we've disowned in ourselves. If you've spent your life being the responsible one, you'll attract irresponsible people. If you've always been the giver, you'll attract takers. If you've suppressed your own anger and aggression, you'll find yourself drawn to people who express those qualities freely, even destructively. This is what Jung called the shadow projection, and it's one of the most powerful forces in human relationships. The qualities you most admire or most despise in others are usually qualities you possess but have you integrated or accepted in yourself. Toxic people become the carriers of your disowned shadow, and you become addicted to the drama they create because, at an unconscious level, they're expressing parts of yourself that you've never learned to embrace. Think about the toxic people in your life. What qualities do they possess that simultaneously attract and repel you? Are they selfish in ways you wish you could be? Are they demanding in ways you've never allowed yourself to be? Are they unapologetically focused on their own needs in ways that terrify and fascinate you? Jung would say that these people aren't just random visitors in your life, they're teachers, showing you exactly what you need to integrate within yourself. But integration doesn't mean becoming toxic yourself. It means developing a healthy relationship with the qualities you've been projecting onto others. Instead of attracting people who are selfishly demanding, you learn to advocate for your own needs appropriately. Instead of drawing in people who are recklessly irresponsible, you learn to let go of excessive control and trust others to handle their own consequences. The reason toxic people keep following you is that you have unlearned to embody the very qualities that would repel them. Healthy boundaries, genuine self-worth, the ability to say no without guilt, the capacity to walk away from anything that doesn't serve your highest good. These aren't just behaviors you can fake until you make it. They're deep psychological shifts that happen when you finally stop abandoning yourself for others. Jung discovered that the individuation process, the journey toward becoming your authentic self, requires you to withdraw the projections you've been casting onto others and reclaim the parts of yourself you've been giving away. This is terrifying work because it means taking full responsibility for your life, your choices, your patterns, and your healing. It means admitting that you've been complicit in your own suffering. Not because you're weak or stupid, but because you've been unconsciously repeating patterns that were programmed into you before you were old enough to choose differently. Most people spend their entire lives blaming others for their relationship problems. They create elaborate stories about how they just have bad luck in love, how all the good ones are taken, how modern dating is impossible, how people today are more selfish than ever. But Jung would tell you that these stories are just elaborate defense mechanisms designed to protect you from the terrifying truth that you are the common denominator in all your relationships. This doesn't mean you're to blame for other people's toxic behavior. It means you're responsible for the unconscious signals that attract that behavior into your life. You can't control what others do, but you can control what you unconsciously broadcast. And toxic people will stop following you the moment you stop broadcasting the signals they're looking for. What are those signals? Desperation disguised as devotion, codependency disguised as caring, people-pleasing disguised as kindness, the unconscious belief that you must earn love through service, that your needs don't matter as much as others, that being alone is worse than being with someone who treats you poorly. These beliefs aren't just thoughts, they're energetic frequencies, and toxic people are tuned into exactly these frequencies. When you finally learn to love yourself not as a concept or affirmation, but as a lived reality, when you develop genuine self-worth that doesn't depend on external validation, when you become comfortable being alone rather than desperately avoiding solitude, something miraculous happens. Toxic people lose interest in you because you're no longer broadcasting the signals they need to hear. But this transformation doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen without significant discomfort. Jung called this process the dark night of the soul, a period where you must face everything you've been avoiding about yourself. Your patterns, your wounds, your complicity in your own suffering. You must grieve the fantasy relationships you've been chasing, the impossible people you've been trying to change, the parts of yourself you've been abandoning in hopes that someone else would finally see your worth. During this process, you'll be tempted to blame others, to focus on their problems rather than your own patterns, to convince yourself that you just need to find better people rather than become a better version of yourself. But Jung understood that external change without internal transformation is just rearranging the furniture in the same house. Until you address the unconscious patterns that attract toxicity, you'll keep attracting it no matter how many times you change jobs, cities, or social circles. The people who successfully break these patterns are those who develop what Jung called the observing self. The part of you that can watch your own psychological processes without being consumed by them. Instead of being unconsciously driven by your needs for validation, approval, or rescue, you learn to observe these needs with compassion but without compulsion. You begin to notice when you're about to say yes when you mean no. You catch yourself making excuses for other people's behavior. You recognize when you're trying to earn love rather than simply being lovable. And most importantly, you develop the capacity to choose differently. Not through willpower alone, but through genuine self-awareness and self-compassion. This is when the real magic happens. When you stop trying to heal others, you create space to heal yourself. When you stop trying to prove your worth, you discover your inherent value. When you stop accepting crumbs of attention, you make room for genuine nourishment. And when you stop broadcasting desperation, you start attracting people who appreciate rather than exploit your gifts. The toxic people don't disappear from the world, but they stop being drawn to you because you're no longer a match for their energy. You've developed an immune system against manipulation, a natural repulsion to anyone who would try to use your kindness against you. You can spot the red flags immediately because you're no longer blinded by your own unmet needs. But perhaps most importantly, you stop needing others to be different than they are, because you've learned to meet your own emotional needs. You no longer require rescue because you've become your own hero. You no longer seek validation because you've developed genuine self-respect. You no longer fear abandonment because you've learned that being alone is infinitely better than being with someone who diminishes your light. Jung said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And part of that process involves learning to attract people who appreciate your authentic self rather than those who would exploit your wounds. It means developing the courage to be disliked by those who preferred you wounded, desperate, and available for manipulation. The toxic people who used to follow you will be replaced by individuals who see your boundaries as attractive rather than challenging, who appreciate your self-sufficiency rather than trying to create dependency, who celebrate your growth rather than sabotaging it. These people exist, but they can only enter your life when you've stopped unconsciously blocking them out with patterns that attract their opposite. This is the path Jung called individuation, the journey from unconscious reactivity to conscious choice, from victim to creator, from someone who attracts toxicity to someone who naturally repels it. It's not about becoming cold or closed-hearted, it's about becoming so full of genuine self-love that you have no room for anyone who would diminish that love. The question is not whether you're capable of this transformation, the question is whether you're willing to do the work it requires. Are you ready to stop playing the victim and start taking responsibility for your patterns? Are you willing to face your own shadow rather than projecting it onto others? Are you prepared to be alone for as long as it takes to develop a relationship with yourself that is so fulfilling that you'd rather be alone than settle for less than you deserve? If you're ready to break the cycle, to stop unconsciously attracting toxic people and start consciously creating relationships that nourish rather than drain you, then you're ready to begin the most important work of your life. The work of becoming so authentically yourself that only authentic people can stand to be around you. Remember, toxic people don't follow everyone. They follow those who unconsciously invite them in. Change the invitation. Change your life. It's time to become the person you've been waiting for someone else to be. But let's go deeper into the specific mechanisms that Jung discovered about how this unconscious attraction works. Because understanding the psychology behind it is the first step toward breaking free from it. Jung identified what he called complexes, autonomous clusters of psychic energy that operate independently of our conscious will. These complexes are formed in childhood through repeated emotional experiences and they continue to run our lives from behind the scenes, attracting people and situations that activate them. Think of complexes as psychological magnets that draw certain types of people and experiences toward you. If you have an abandonment complex, formed perhaps by a parent who was emotionally unavailable or inconsistent, you'll unconsciously attract people who are unavailable, inconsistent, or likely to abandon you. Your conscious mind might desperately want a stable, committed relationship, but your unconscious complex will sabotage every opportunity for genuine intimacy, because it's programmed to recreate the familiar dynamic of abandonment and pursuit. Jung observed that these complexes have their own intelligence, their own agenda, and they're incredibly sophisticated at ensuring their own survival. The abandonment complex doesn't want to be healed, it wants to be fed, and it feeds on the drama of unstable relationships, on the familiar pain of being left behind, on the addictive cycle of pursuit and rejection that keeps you trapped in patterns that hurt you. This is why intellectual understanding alone is never enough to break these patterns. You can read every self-help book ever written. You can understand attachment theory and trauma psychology, you can even become a therapist yourself. But until you address the complexes at their root level, they will continue to run your life and attract exactly the people and situations that keep them alive. Toxic people are drawn to you, not because you're weak, but because you're carrying unintegrated psychic energy that they can feed off. Jung called this psychological vampirism, and it's far more common than most people realize. Every unhealed wound, every suppressed emotion, every disowned part of yourself becomes a source of energy that others can tap into, often without either of you being consciously aware of what's happening. Consider the people-pleasing complex. This develops in children who learn that their survival depends on keeping others happy, on anticipating needs, on sacrificing their own well-being for the comfort of others. As adults, people with strong people-pleasing complexes become magnets for narcissists, manipulators, and anyone looking for someone to exploit. The people-pleaser gets their fix of feeling needed and important, while the toxic person gets their needs met without having to reciprocate. Both parties are unconsciously colluding in maintaining this dynamic, because it serves the complexes that drive them. The people-pleaser's complex tells them they're being loving and selfless, while the toxic person's complex tells them they deserve special treatment and unlimited access to others' energy. Neither person is consciously choosing this dynamic. They're both being driven by unconscious programs that were installed in childhood. Jung discovered that these patterns are so deeply embedded that they operate below the level of language and logic. You could unthink your way out of them because they exist in the realm of pure emotion and sensation. They were created before you had words to describe them, and they continue to operate in the wordless depths of your psyche, attracting experiences that match their frequency. This is why toxic people can spot your vulnerabilities within minutes of meeting you. They're not necessarily more intelligent or insightful than healthy people. They read just more attuned to the frequency of unhealed wounds, because their own survival has depended on their ability to find people they can manipulate. They've developed what Jung might call a predatory instinct, an unconscious radar that can detect psychological wounds the way a shark can detect blood in water. When you first meet a toxic person, you might feel an immediate sense of connection, of being seen and understood in a way that feels almost magical. Jung would tell you that this feeling is real, but it's not what you think it is. What you're re-experiencing is the toxic person's ability to mirror back the exact qualities your wounded inner child has always longed to see. They become the perfect parent you never had, the ideal partner you've always dreamed of, the friend who finally gets you. But this mirroring is not based on genuine love or understanding. It's based on their unconscious ability to read your psychological blueprint and become whatever you most need them to be. They're not falling in love with you, they're falling in love with what you can provide for them, and they're re-showing you a version of themselves that is designed to hook your deepest longings and keep you emotionally invested in the relationship. This is what makes toxic relationships so addictive and so difficult to leave. The person you fell in love with, the person who made you feel so seen and valued and understood. That person was real in the moment, but they were also a projection. A psychological movie created by the collision between your unmet needs and their ability to become whatever would most effectively manipulate you. Jung understood that this process is largely unconscious on both sides. Most toxic people don't wake up in the morning planning to manipulate others, and most people who attract toxicity don't consciously choose to be victims. Both are being driven by complexes and patterns that operate automatically, like psychological software running in the background of their consciousness. The toxic person learned early in life that their survival depended on their ability to get their needs met through others, often through a combination of charm, manipulation, and emotional blackmail. They developed what Jung might call a predatory complex, a part of their psyche that's always scanning for opportunities to extract energy, attention, resources, or validation from others, without having to give anything genuine in return. Meanwhile, the person who attracts toxicity developed what we might call a rescue or caretaking complex, a part of their psyche that gets activated by others' needs, problems, or potential. This complex tells them that their worth depends on their ability to help, heal, save, or change others, and it's constantly seeking out people who need saving as a way of feeling valuable and important. When these two complexes meet, they create what Jung called a psychological constellation, a mutually reinforcing dynamic that becomes incredibly difficult to break, because each person is getting something they desperately need from the interaction, even though what they're getting is ultimately toxic and unsustainable. The rescue complex gets its fix of feeling needed and important, while the predatory complex gets its supply of energy and resources. Both people feel like they're in love. Both feel like they've found their soulmates. But what they've actually found is their psychological complement. The person whose wounds and defenses perfectly match their own, in a way that creates maximum drama and minimum genuine intimacy. Jung observed that these dynamics can persist for years or even decades, because both parties become addicted to the pathological payoff they receive from the interaction. The rescuer becomes addicted to the feeling of being needed, to the drama of trying to save someone, to the fantasy that their love can heal another person's wounds. The toxic person becomes addicted to having their needs met without reciprocating, to the power of being able to control someone through emotional manipulation, to the constant supply of energy and attention that the rescuer provides. Breaking this cycle requires more than just deciding to choose better people. It requires a fundamental rewiring of the unconscious complexes that create the attraction in the first place. This is what Jung called the process of making the unconscious conscious, and it's some of the most difficult but most essential work a human being can do. The first step is developing what Jung called the observing ego, the part of you that can watch your own psychological processes without being consumed by them. Instead of being unconsciously driven by your need to rescue others, you learn to observe that need with curiosity and compassion. Instead of automatically saying yes when you mean no, you pause and ask yourself, what complex is being activated and what it's trying to get from the situation. This observing capacity allows you to create space between your automatic reactions and your conscious choices. You begin to see the patterns that have been running your life, the ways you've been unconsciously recreating your childhood dynamics, the specific types of people and situations that activate your complexes and pull you into familiar but destructive patterns. As you develop this awareness, you also begin to understand that your attraction to toxic people is not random or meaningless. It's your psyche's attempt to heal itself by recreating, and hopefully resolving, the original wounds that created the complexes in the first place. Your unconscious mind keeps bringing you the same type of person over and over again, because it's hoping that this time you'll be able to heal the wound, complete the unfinished business, get the love or validation or security that you never received as a child. But Jung discovered that this unconscious healing strategy almost never works, because it's based on trying to get from others what you can only give to yourself. You can't heal your abandonment wound by convincing someone not to abandon you. You can't heal your unworthiness wound by getting someone to validate your worth. You can't heal your safety wound by controlling another person's behavior. These wounds can only be healed from within, through developing a loving, consistent relationship with yourself. This is where Jung's concept of individuation becomes crucial. Individuation is not just about becoming independent from others. It's about becoming conscious of and integrating all the parts of yourself that you've been projecting onto others. It's about reclaiming the energy you've been giving away through unconscious complexes, and learning to meet your own needs in healthy, sustainable ways. When you begin this work, one of the first things you'll notice is how much resistance you encounter, not just from others, but from your own unconscious mind. The complexes that have been running your life don't want to be integrated, they want to continue operating autonomously. And they'll create all kinds of internal drama to keep you from changing. You might find yourself feeling guilty for setting boundaries, anxious about not rescuing others, depressed about the possibility of being alone, or angry at the suggestion that you've been complicit in creating your own suffering. These emotions are not signs that you're doing something wrong. They're signs that you're beginning to challenge the unconscious patterns that have been controlling your life. Jung called this phase of the work the encounter with the shadow, and it is often the most difficult part of the individuation process because it requires you to face aspects of yourself that you've been denying or avoiding. You have to acknowledge your own capacity for manipulation, your own selfishness, your own neediness, your own participation in the very dynamics you claim to hate. This doesn't mean you're as toxic as the people you've been attracting. It means you're human, and all humans have the capacity for both light and shadow, both love and selfishness, both generosity and manipulation. The difference between healthy and toxic people is not that healthy people don't have shadow qualities. It's that they are conscious of these qualities and take responsibility for them rather than projecting them onto others. As you integrate your shadow, something remarkable happens. You become less attractive to toxic people because you're no longer projecting your disowned qualities onto them. You don't need them to be selfish so you can feel selfless. You don't need them to be irresponsible so you can feel responsible. You don't need them to be needy so you can feel needed. You become whole within yourself, which means you no longer need others to carry parts of your psyche for you. This integration process also makes you naturally repulsive to toxic people, because you develop what Jung called psychological boundaries. These are not just behavioral boundaries like saying no or limiting contact. They're energetic boundaries that prevent others from accessing and feeding off your psychic energy without your conscious consent. When you have strong psychological boundaries, manipulative people can't get a foothold in your psyche. Their attempts to push your buttons don't work because you've become conscious of your buttons and learn to respond rather than react. Their attempts to make you feel guilty or responsible for their problems don't work because you've developed a clear sense of what is and isn't your responsibility. Their attempts to create drama and chaos don't work because you've learned to maintain your center regardless of what is happening around you. But developing these boundaries requires you to face one of the most terrifying truths about human relationships, which is that many of the people in your life are there not because they love you for who you are, but because they love what you do for them, what you provide for them, what role you play in their psychological drama. When you stop playing that role, when you stop being available for manipulation and exploitation, many of these people will disappear from your life. This is what Jung called the loneliness of individuation, and it's an inevitable part of the process of becoming whole. You will lose people who only valued you for your willingness to abandon yourself for them. You will disappoint people who expected you to remain small and wounded and available for their use. You will be misunderstood by people who preferred you when you were unconscious and reactive and easy to control. But what you lose in quantity, you gain in quality. As you become more conscious, more integrated, more genuinely self-loving, you begin to attract people who appreciate these qualities rather than trying to exploit their absence. You begin to form relationships based on mutual respect rather than mutual neediness, on genuine compatibility rather than unconscious psychological complementarity. These healthier relationships feel different from the intense, dramatic, addictive relationships you may have experienced with toxic people. They're calmer, more stable, more predictable in the best possible way. They don't provide the same adrenaline rush of constantly trying to earn, love, or prove your worth, but they provide something much more valuable: the deep peace and security of being accepted for who you are rather than what you can provide. Jung understood that this transformation is not just personal, it's spiritual. When you stop projecting your power onto others, when you reclaim the energy you've been giving away through unconscious complexes, when you learn to love yourself not as a concept, but as a lived reality, you begin to access what he called the transcendent function, the part of the psyche that can transform suffering into wisdom, wounds into gifts, unconscious patterns into conscious choices. This is the ultimate goal of individuation, not just to stop attracting toxic people, but to become so whole, so integrated, so genuinely loving toward yourself that you naturally attract people who mirror these qualities back to you. You become a magnet for health instead of dysfunction, for love instead of manipulation, for growth instead of stagnation. But this work never ends. It's a lifelong process of becoming more conscious, more integrated, more authentic. There will always be new layers to discover, new patterns to heal, new aspects of yourself to embrace and integrate. The difference is that once you've learned how to do this work, once you've developed the capacity to observe your own psychological processes and make conscious choices about how you respond to life, you become the creator of your own experience rather than the victim of unconscious patterns. The toxic people will always be out there, looking for their next source of supply, their next victim to exploit and drain. But they won't be looking at you anymore because you'll have become transparent to them. Uninteresting, unavailable for the kind of psychological exploitation they depend on. You'll have learned to meet your own needs in healthy ways, which means you no longer need others to be different than they are in order for you to be okay. This is the freedom that Jung called individuation, the liberation that comes from becoming whole within yourself, the peace that emerges when you stop seeking from others what you can only give to yourself. It's not about becoming cold or closed off or disconnected from others. It says about becoming so full of genuine self-love that you have an abundance to share with those who are worthy of your gifts, while naturally repelling those who would try to exploit or diminish your light.